Challenges of environmental degradation in Nigeria. Despite the variety of initiatives to combat environmental degradation internationally and nationally, the problem persists. Therefore, all countries and peoples, including Nigeria and its people, are challenged in the face of this monster called environmental degradation. Nigeria, with a population of over 150 million people, is home to approximately 250 different ethnic groups, each with its language. The three largest, the Hausa Fulani, the Yoruba and Igbo, together are less than 2/3 of all Nigerians. The country is evenly divided between Christianity predominantly in the south and Islam in the north. There are traditionalists in the land. The north is among the poorest, predominantly Muslim regions in the world. In terms of income, most Nigerians are very poor, with oil wealth concentrated in the hand of a few elites. Boko Haram is a major devastation factor in respect of peace and security in the land. In addition to this landscape, water and electricity supply are notoriously erratic, if not non-existent in many places. Infrastructural challenges continue to make the cost of production in Nigeria one of the highest in the world, and by so doing, putting operators in the sector at a disadvantage compared to their counterparts in other countries. In the face of this, some corporations move their headquarters away from Nigeria. Corruption and glaring ineptitude of both the leadership and ranks and file of the Nigerian police force have seen crime rates spiraling to unprecedented levels. Armed robberies, political assassinations, kidnapping and brazen thuggery are of common occurrence. Specifically, the problem of poverty, which is the bane of development in Nigeria, has not been adequately addressed in spite of National Policy on Poverty Eradication 2000 program. The socio-economic, political and religious landscape of Nigeria and the reality of climate change / global warming caused by unsustainable development practices pose the question all over again, namely the question of societal transformation for progress. Such a transformation should lead to a situation where no one will be denied any necessities of life, including decent environment. The urgent ecological question as they related to flood, growth, epidemics, resources depletion, oil sludge and spillage, ozone depletion, noise and air pollution, among others, were overlooked in the past must be in the front burner of national discourse. For instance, there is a need for paradigm shift in Christian theology that focused on question of personal salvation and the last four things of death, judgment, heaven and hell at the detriment of wholesome environment. Fortunately and diligently, today there is an awakening of interest among many stakeholders in ecological issues and challenges of environment to establish a linkage between environmental issues with religion. Another but related question may be asked, namely, why does the contemporary human world worry about ecology issues? Why worry about resource depletion and other associated ecological challenges? Why worry about future generations, the billions of people who will come after if the present population allows? The resources of the planet Earth are themselves finite and inexhaustible. In the face of this fact, the affirmation of the tradition that the planet Earth is a gift to humanity and must be treated as such, Genesis 1, and must be upheld. It is therefore necessary that ecological policies and legislation must serve the public interest and the common good. Such policies and programs must go beyond the personal, ethnic, national interests of present generation and look forward to the interests of future generations as well. It is in this context that unrelenting pursuit of sustainable ecology becomes mandatory for everybody. Nigerians must begin to reconsider basic questions about common benefits versus individual rights. Individuals may be able to afford 2 cars or more. For example, a nuclear family with palatial apartment, but can the planet afford such lifestyle and wastage? The beauty and sustainability of the Earth planet can be reclaimed, by this requires, among others, an active commitment to peace and sustainable development by all. This in turn must involve not only measures directed to prevent war, but also needed to build peace. This will include public as well as private commitment to invest heavily in environmental protection and restoration, as well as poverty eradication of the poor. Such investments require time, effort, money, and radical change of extravagant lifestyle of the very rich citizens of both the industrialized and developing countries. In addition, there is need for moral value reorientation, ethics too. The orientation needs to be human-centered and be open and more tolerant to diversity of other beings, biodiversity, in their own rights. If human beings see themselves part of ecological process rather than its most celebrated rulers, the result may well be a kinder, more tolerant and gentler way of living, not only with the planet but also with each other. After all, human beings are holy stewards of the Creator. Similarly, preventive and precautionary principle must be clearly at work all the time. This principle requires that activities which does or will cause environmental pollution or damage must be prohibited. This will seek to minimize environmental damage by requiring that action be taken at an early stage of the process of developmental project, for instance, where possible, before such damage has actually occurred. Today, the preventive principle is supported by an extensive body of domestic environmental protection legislation and many international conventions. At the international level, this is especially significant because the acceptance of this principle means that states are actively constrained against allowing pollution activities within their own national jurisdiction, in addition to their international obligation not to allow activities which cause damage to territories of other states and areas beyond national jurisdiction. Reference to this is the Principle 21 of the Stockholm Declaration 1972 and Principle 2 of the Rio Declaration 1992. States have, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the principle of the international law, the sovereign right to exploit their own resources pursuant to their own environmental policies, and the responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limit of national jurisdiction. A notable example of this general prohibition against pollution activities is Article 194 of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea Marine Environment as a whole, both within and outside their national marine zone jurisdiction. The potential impact of the precautionary principle on the development of environmental law is immense. In its progressive formulation, the precautionary principle may be utilized to overturn the traditional burden of proof that is presently weighted in favor of polluters, in the sense that any activity has to be proven to cause pollution before action may be taken to prevent, reduce, or control such pollution. The precautionary principle will act to reverse the burden of proof and require any potential polluter to ensure that the activity will not cause pollution before it's allowed to commence in the first instance. Such an ambiguous approach was not there in the past because it has been deemed too costly in the short term. Today, legal formulations of the principle have ended to include a cost-benefit element. For instance, Principle 15 of the Rio Declaration 1992 provides that where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. The Climate Change Convention 1992 incorporates a similar formulation of the precautionary principle. See Article 33. On the other hand, the 1992 Paris Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Northeast Atlantic introduces a different formulation of the principle. It links it with the preventive measures are to be taken when there are reasonable grounds for concern. Even when there is no conclusive relationship between inputs and their alleged effects, Article 22A, the different emphasis within its formulation of the precautionary and preventive principle, especially with respect to the level of threat to the environment that is required before precautionary action should be taken, and the introduction of a cost-benefit element to such an action means that there is no uniform understanding of the legal concern of the principles. In the case of Nigeria, the Ministry of Environment is established to uphold the precautionary principle. This is manifested in, for instance, the mandatory environmental impact assessment report before the execution of any major development project. Last Saturday, Environmental Day of some states, and ban on the forest fire burning, especially in preparation for farming, Nigeria still has a long way to go in this context, making good governance and leadership paramount and indispensable. Good governance / leadership, the bedrock of progress and development, will not just happen. It has to be worked for, nurtured, and developed. It calls for hard work, political engineering, courage, and eternal vigilance of stakeholders. This is because the existence and the security, which includes territorial defense of the country, the physical, social, and psychological quality of the citizen are at stake. Education has a major role to play in the promotion of good governance and effective renewal of environment degradation and reversing global warming. Education prepares an individual to contribute positively to society. Education may have forms, namely formal, informal, and non-formal. But its primary aim is not just only to prepare a person for a particular kind of job or profession, as important as that may be, but also the development of personality, which involves the development of both the intellect and the will of the individual. In other words, education is the total process of human learning by which knowledge is imparted, faculties trained, will empowered, and skills developed. This type of education will relate to environment in its totality. It will promote the care of all creation because it is good, and its goodness embedded in its wholeness, within which mankind can only live well and meaningfully too. Human beings are dependent on the rest of nature, and if human beings care for it, in its own turn will protect human beings. Same vein, technology has a role to play. Our history has shown that technological advances have steadily enhanced human capacity to raise living standard. Food production, access to sources of water, energy, and minerals have proved to be a double-edged sword. For instance, the chlorofluorocarbons that at first appear to be ideal chemical for so many different uses has turned out that once they reach the upper atmosphere, they began destroying the ozone layer and thus threatening life on the Earth planet. Contemporary technologies need to be integral. They need to take care of human and non-human waste products. waste disposal should be associated with a process, either the immediate process or a related process. This law of integrity is widely violated. The brazenness of industrial establishment is difficult to understand. It blasts its refuse into the atmosphere or pours it into streams or dumps its trash onto the fertile wetland. It is strange that the chemical industry has done so little concerned with what happens to its chemicals once they are used for some isolated or limited purposes. What finally happens to those deadly substances seems not to concern many of the industries that produce them. This refusal to deal with their own waste is one of the most universal, consistent, and repulsive aspects of the contemporary technologies. Relevant technologies need to function within a bioregional context, not simply on a national or global scale. The functional division of the human should accord with the functional divisions of the earth itself and its life form, since the earth is not given to humanity in a single global sameness. The earth articulates itself in Arctic and tropics, in sea coast and mountain regions, in plains and valleys, in desert and woodlands. Likewise, the irrigation, agricultural chemicals and high-yielding crop varieties that made the green revolution possible depleted and contaminated water supplies, poisoned wildlife and people, and encouraged monoculture cropping that reduced agricultural diversity. Each draftiness boosted fish harvest but contributed to overfishing and the depletion of stock. Manufacturing processes that rapidly turned timber into pulp and paper have fueled the loss of forests and created mountains of waste paper. If Nigerians must do something about the paper waste in order to promote sustainable ecology, then there is need for improvement in wood use and reaction in wood and paper waste in order to reduce pressures on forests. Seriously to be considered in this respect is the shift towards production of treeless paper, that is, paper made from non-wood pulp such as hemp, bamboo, jeremiad, need. Electronic technology must be made to have a bearing on the way we conduct meetings and conferences and examinations. In this fora, tons of papers are used and never recycled. There is need for a functional cosmology that will provide the mystic need for integral earth-human presence. Such a mystic is available once it is considered that the universe, the earth, the sequence of living form, and the human mode of consequences are from the beginning at spirituals as well as physical material aspects. There is no need for such a strict spiritual interpretation of the earth process as are sometimes proposed. What is needed is a sense of reverence such as it is found with the great naturalists, or such as with some of the foremost scientists of our time. Scientists such as Freeman Dyson, Sir Bernard Lowell, Brian Swimmer, or Hilia Prigogine. Until technologists learn reference for the earth, there will be no possibility of bringing a healing or a new creative age to the earth. For people of faith, individually and collectively, the planet Earth is God's creation and a gift and must be related to accordingly. In addition, it is what is done here on earth that will determine the type of reward that every individual will receive from life after death. The reward is either heaven or hell. In this wise, working for human development in the context of sustainable ecology is mandatory, and failure to comply implies that the individual refuses to give glory to God, the author of all. It is therefore necessary for all to promote and preach practice that is truly humane and truly divine. In addition, Nigerians need to appreciate all over again that the health is a sacrament vivified by the living Spirit of God. They need to realize that the way they are destroying it is tantamount to a sacrilege, a grievous sin. Therefore, they need to act as members of the health community, called to be partners with God in the ongoing creation rather than its destruction. This moment of crisis that is being experienced calls for a spiritual renewal and ethics that will empower them to live in the web of life as sustainers rather than destroyers of the Word of God. They must promote the centrality of the well-being of every Nigerian, promote and protect the environment, abhor extravagant lifestyle of great accumulation as well as corruption, and demand that government at all levels be accountable so that the beauty of the earth could be sustained and preserved and its blessings be experienced by all. Finally, unless the government does remedy most, if not all, the anomalies of the land, on the hand, establish an enabling environment where conversion of health of every citizen takes place on the other hand, and encourage collaboration of religions of the land, it is difficult to see how Nigeria can promote sustainable ecology and effectively develop as a nation that will leave a legacy and save environment for future generations.